The Mafia boss needed a date for his brother's wedding. Who he brought shocked everyone. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office, blurring the glittering skyline of Harborview into streaks of gray and gold. 30 stories up, the city looked peaceful, organized, and distant. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but serene. Nico Caruso stood with his back to the room, staring out at the storm. At 32, he carried the weight of the Caruso crime family on shoulders broad enough to bear it. Clad in a suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, his reflection in the glass showed a man with sharp, predatory features, dark eyes that rarely gave away his thoughts, and a jaw set in permanent tension. Behind him, the air was thick with the scent of espresso and old leather. His consigliere, Silas, sat at the mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of seating charts, security protocols, and guest lists. Sitting in the plush armchair near the fireplace was Aunt Amelia, the matriarch who had helped raise Nico after his mother passed. She was small, silver-haired, and terrifying. "We need a final decision on the head table arrangements," Silas said, his voice scratching against the silence. "The DeLucas are insisting that their capos sit near the front. If we push them back, it looks like an insult. If we bring them forward, it looks like we are conceding territory." Nico did not turn around. "Put them at table 4, close enough to feel important, far enough to know they are guests, not family." Silas made a note. "And the +1 situation. Boss, the RSVP deadline was yesterday. Everyone is asking who you are bringing." Nico's hand tightened around the crystal tumbler of whiskey he was holding. He took a slow sip, letting the burn settle in his chest before he spoke. "I am going alone. I have work to do. I do not have time to entertain a date." Aunt Amelia made a sharp, clicking sound with her tongue. She stood up, her cane tapping rhythmically on the hardwood floor as she approached him. "You cannot go alone. Nico." "Not to this wedding." Nico turned then, his expression flat. "It is my brother's wedding, Amelia. Not a diplomatic summit. I will be there to support Marco and welcome his new wife." "That is enough. It is not enough," Amelia snapped, stopping a few feet from him. "This marriage to the DeLuca girl is supposed to signal strength, unity, stability. If you walk into that cathedral alone, looking like a man who sleeps with a gun under his pillow and trusts no one, the other families will smell blood. They already smell blood," Nico said, his voice dropping an octave. "They have been circling since the raid last year. My dating life is irrelevant." "It is entirely relevant," Silas interjected, taking off his reading glasses. "The rumors are already circulating." "Nico, people talk. They say you have not been the same since the raid. They say you are paranoid, unstable. They say you cannot hold on to anyone because you are still broken over that girl." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nico went very still. "Do not," he warned softly. "They call her the agent girl." Amelia pressed on, fearless as always. "The one who made a fool of you. The one who slept in your bed, ate at your table, and then handed your father over to the federal government. If you show up alone, it confirms everything they whisper behind your back. It says she destroyed you. It says the great Nico Caruso is too damaged to function like a man." Nico set his glass down on the windowsill with a heavy thud. The glass did not break, but the sound echoed like a gunshot. "She did not destroy me," Nico said, the words precise and cold. "She was a Fed. I handled it. It is done." "Then prove it," Amelia challenged. "Find a woman, a respectable woman. Someone beautiful and poised, who looks at you like you are the sun and the moon. Walk into that wedding with her on your arm and show the DeLucas that you are in control of your life. Show them you have moved on." Nico looked from his aunt to his consigliere. They were right. In their world, perception was power. If he appeared weak, isolated, or haunted by the ghost of a woman who had betrayed him, the sharks would attack. He needed a shield. He needed a prop. He needed a lie that looked like the truth. "I will handle it," Nico said, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "Finish the seating charts. I will have a date for the wedding." Silas hesitated. "Anyone specific in mind?" "Boss, we could call—" "I said I will handle it." Nico cut him off. "Get out." When the heavy oak doors clicked shut, Nico turned back to the window. The rain was falling harder now, drowning the city. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting, unwanted second, a memory flashed behind his eyelids, green eyes. A laugh that sounded like music, the smell of vanilla and gunpowder, Eva. She was the wound that refused to heal, and she was the only person in the world who could play the part he needed, because she was the only one who had ever made him believe the lie was real. 5 miles away, on the quieter side of Harborview, where the streetlights flickered and the rent was paid in cash, the rain hammered against the roof of a small restaurant called the Rusty Anchor. It was a Tuesday night, and the place was slow. The air smelled of frying onions and stale beer. Behind the bar, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun was wiping down the counter. Her name tag read Maya, but her hands were the hands of Ivy Cole. Ivy worked mechanically, her movements efficient and invisible. She kept her head down. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then, her voice was a soft murmur that invited no further conversation. She wore baggy clothes to hide her figure and no makeup to hide her features. A busboy dropped a tray of silverware in the kitchen. Clang! Ivy flinched violently, her shoulders jerking up toward her ears. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. She gripped the edge of the bar, white-knuckled, forcing herself to breathe. It is just forks, she told herself. Just metal on tile. Not a slide racking back, not a casing hitting the floor. She closed her eyes, counting backward from 10. The panic receded, leaving her exhausted. It had been a year, but the instincts of a federal agent deep undercover never really faded. The hypervigilance was always there, humming under her skin. She'd spent 3 years as Ava Rossi, infiltrating the Caruso crime family. She'd been the perfect girlfriend, the perfect listener, the perfect spy. She had gathered the evidence that put Nico's father, the Don, into a maximum security prison for the rest of his life. It was the biggest bust in the Bureau's history. It was also the worst mistake of her life, because somewhere between the wiretaps and the surveillance logs, she had stopped pretending. She had fallen in love with the son of the monster she was hunting. And when the raid happened, when the doors were kicked in and the flashbangs went off, she had seen the look on Nico's face. It wasn't anger. It was a devastation so total it looked like death. She had vanished the next day. The FBI had offered her witness protection, a new life in Arizona or Montana, but she had refused. She couldn't be part of the system anymore. She had quit the force, burned her bridges, and disappeared into the cracks of the city she couldn't bear to leave. "Hey, Maya, can you turn up the volume?" "Old mister," Henderson called out from the corner booth. Ivy blinked. Snapping back to the present, she reached for the remote and pointed it at the small television mounted above the top shelf bottles. The local news anchor was smiling, a graphic of wedding rings displayed behind her. In social news, the city is bracing for what some are calling the wedding of the decade, the reporter chirped. Marco Caruso, son of the infamous Caruso family, is set to wed Sofia DeLuca this Saturday. The union is seen by many as a merger of two powerful, albeit controversial, Harborview dynasties. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at the screen as a file photo appeared. It showed Marco, young and grinning, and next to him, a candid shot of Nico. He looked harder than she remembered. The lines around his mouth were deeper, his eyes colder. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to smile. Her stomach twisted into a knot. Seeing him, even on a grainy screen, felt like a physical blow. She remembered the way his hands felt, rough palms, gentle fingers. She remembered the way he used to look at her, as if she were the only clean thing in his dirty world. And she remembered the last time she saw him, standing in handcuffs while she held her badge, neither of them saying a word. "Turn it off," Ivy whispered, though no one could hear her. "Please. Is that the older brother?" "Mister," Henderson asked, squinting at the TV. "They say he is the one running things now. Scary-looking guy." Ivy turned away, grabbing a rag to aggressively clean a spot that was already spotless. She needed to leave. She needed to go back to her tiny studio apartment, lock the 3 deadbolts, and sit in the dark until the shaking stopped. The bell above the restaurant door chimed. It was a cheerful sound, usually signaling a hungry neighbor or a tired shift worker. But this time, the sound was followed by a sudden, heavy silence. The low hum of conversation in the restaurant died instantly. The clinking of forks stopped. The air pressure in the room seemed to plummet, making ears pop. Ivy kept her head down, her heart rate spiking. She knew that silence. She knew exactly what kind of men walked into a room and sucked all the oxygen out of it. "Maya," the manager hissed from the kitchen doorway, his face pale. "Front." Ivy slowly lifted her head. Standing in the entrance were two men she didn't recognize. Massive, suit-clad walls of muscle with earpieces and bulging jackets. They stepped aside. Clearing the path, Nico walked in. He was wearing a charcoal trench coat over a black suit, damp from the rain. He looked out of place among the faded vinyl booths and checkered tablecloths, like a wolf walking into a petting zoo. He didn't look at the customers. He didn't look at the manager. His dark eyes scanned the room with terrifying precision, sweeping from left to right until they landed on the bar, until they landed on her. Ivy froze. Her lungs seized. For a second, she thought she might faint. "He found me. He's going to kill me. Right here. In front of Mr. Henderson." Nico walked toward the bar. His gait was smooth, predatory. Every step echoed on the linoleum floor. The customers shrank back into their booths, sensing the violence that rolled off him in waves. He stopped directly in front of her. The bar counter. A barrier of only 2 feet. Felt non-existent. Up close, he was overwhelming. She could smell the rain on his coat, the scent of expensive sandalwood and tobacco that used to cling to her own sheets. Ivy gripped the rag in her hand, her knuckles white. She tried to summon the mask she wore every day. She tried to be Maya. "Can I get you something?" she asked. Her voice trembled. Just a fraction, but it was enough. Nico stared at her. His expression did not change. There was no anger, no surprise, just a flat, terrifying recognition. He studied her face, noting the lack of makeup, the severe hair, the fear in her eyes. A small, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. It did not reach his eyes. "Hello?" "Eva," he said. The name hit her like a slap. It was the name of the woman who loved him, the name of the liar. "I don't know who that is," Ivy said, her voice tighter now. "My name is Maya. If you want a drink, order. If not, please leave." Nico placed his hands on the bar. They were leather-gloved. "We need to talk. Privately." "I cannot leave the bar," she said, clutching her defense like a shield. "I am working." Nico glanced at the manager, who was hovering by the kitchen door, shaking like a leaf. "She is taking a break," Nico announced. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. The manager nodded frantically. "Yes, go. Take a break. Maya, take as long as you need." Ivy felt the trap snap shut. She looked at the 2 bodyguards blocking the exit. She looked at Nico, who was waiting with the patience of a man who held all the cards. "Fine," she whispered. She came out from behind the bar, her legs feeling like lead. Nico gestured toward the back of the restaurant, near the storage room and the employee lockers. He walked with her, not touching her, but his presence was a cage. They stepped into the cramped storage room. It was filled with crates of soda syrup and stacks of napkins. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Ivy turned to face him, her back against a stack of beer kegs. "What do you want?" she demanded. Dropping the act, the fear was turning into adrenaline. "If you're going to kill me, Nico, just do it. Don't drag it out." Nico closed the door and locked it. The click was deafening. He turned to her, removing his gloves slowly, finger by finger. "I am not here to kill you. Ivy." He used her real name, the one she had never told him. "I know who you are," he continued, his voice low and smooth. "Ivy Cole, former special agent, top of your class at Quantico, commendations for undercover work in Chicago and Miami, and the architect of the downfall of the Caruso family." Ivy lifted her chin. "I did my job." "You lied," Nico corrected. "For 3 years. You lied every time you smiled, every time you touched me, every time you said you loved me. I didn't—" Ivy started, then stopped herself. She couldn't have this conversation. Not now. Not when she was cornered. It doesn't matter. Why are you here, Nico? How did you find me? I have known where you were for 6 months, he revealed, shocking her. I kept tabs. I wanted to see if you would run back to your handlers, but you didn't. You stayed here, slinging cheap gin in a dive bar. He took a step closer. The space between them shrank. But I'm not the only one looking for you. Ivy, there are people in my world, and yours, who are not as forgiving as I am. What are you talking about? My father is in prison, but his friends are not, Nico said, and it seems you made enemies on both sides. There is a contract out on you, a quiet one. Someone wants the rat silenced before she can testify again. Or maybe they just want revenge. Ivy felt cold. Who? Does it matter? Nico asked. Dead is dead. You have no badge, no backup. You are a sitting duck, Ivy. So you came to warn me? She asked skeptically. Out of the goodness of your heart? No, Nico said. I came to make a trade. He stopped, his eyes searching hers, looking for the woman he used to know beneath the fear. I need a date, he said simply. Ivy stared at him. She blinked. Sure, she had heard him wrong. Excuse me? My brother is getting married on Saturday. It is a political wedding. The DeLucas will be there. My investors, my enemies. All of them are watching me, waiting for a sign of weakness. They think I am broken. They think the woman who betrayed me left me unable to function. He took another step. She could feel the heat radiating from him now. I need to walk into that wedding with a woman on my arm, a woman who knows the players, a woman who can lie with a straight face, a woman who looks at me like she belongs to me. He paused, letting the words hang in the heavy air. I want you. Eva. You are insane, Ivy breathed. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? In front of your family? Your aunt will recognize me. Your men will recognize me. They want to kill me. Nico. My men do what I tell them, Nico said, his voice hard iron. And Aunt Amelia knows what is at stake. As for everyone else, let them recognize you. Let them see that the woman who tried to destroy me is back in my bed. It sends a message. It says I own you. It says I am untouchable. I won't do it. Ivy shook her head frantically. I can't go back to that life. Then I walk out that door, Nico said calmly. And I mentioned to a few contacts that Ivy Cole is working the Tuesday shift at the Rusty Anchor. How long do you think you will last? An hour? Tonight? It was blackmail. Pure and simple, you are a monster, she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Nico's face didn't soften, but his eyes darkened. He stepped in close, crowding her against the kegs. He placed one hand on the wall beside her head, boxing her in. I am what you made me, he murmured. They were inches apart now. The air in the storage room became suddenly, suffocatingly hot. Ivy looked up at him, her breath hitching. She should shove him away. She should scream, but her body betrayed her. Her pulse hammered in her throat, visible under the skin. She saw his gaze flick down to her lips, then back to her eyes. The last time we were this close, Nico said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. You were wearing a wire. You were memorizing my passwords while I was memorizing the shape of your body. Ivy flushed, shame and heat mixing in her chest. Stop it. Now it is my turn, Nico said. I need you to lie for me. Ivy, I need you to be Eva Rossi one last time. You do this for me. You get through the rehearsal dinner and the wedding, and I will wipe the slate clean. I will give you a new identity, a safe house, money, protection that actually works. And if I say no, then you are on your own. Ivy looked into his eyes. She saw the ruthlessness there, but she also saw something else. Desperation? Hurt? It was buried deep, but it was there. He was hurting her because he had to, but also because he wanted her close. It was twisted. It was dangerous. And God help her. She could feel the magnetic pull of him, the gravity that had drawn her in 3 years ago. Being near him felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. She took a shaky breath. If I do this, she started, her voice barely audible. If I do this, there are rules. Nico waited. No illegal activities, Ivy said. I won't carry a gun. I won't be part of any deals. And she swallowed hard. And this is just pretend. We are acting. You don't touch me unless there is an audience. Nico's jaw tightened. He looked at her mouth again, a flicker of hunger crossing his face before he shuttered it. Agreed, he said. Ivy felt like she had just signed a deal with the devil, but the alternative was a bullet in the back of the head. When? She asked. Now, Nico said, pushing off the wall. Pack a bag. You are moving into the penthouse tonight. We have 4 days to get our story straight before the rehearsal dinner. Tonight? Ivy panicked. The wedding is in 4 days, Nico said, opening the door and letting the sounds of the restaurant filter back in. And we have a lot of rehearsing to do. He held the door open for her, his face returning to that impassive, stony mask. After you, Eva. Ivy Cole stepped out of the storage room and walked toward the man who had once been the love of her life and was now her captor. She walked past the stunned customers, past the terrified manager, and out into the rain where the black SUV was waiting. She was going back into the dark, and she wasn't sure if she would ever come out again. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive hush, revealing a penthouse that spanned the entire top floor of the Millennium Tower. Ivy stepped out, her grip tightening on the handle of her small, battered suitcase. It was the only thing she had brought from her life as Maya, and it looked pitiful against the marble floors and Art Deco columns of Nico's home. The space was breathtaking, a sprawling expanse of glass, steel, and dark wood. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of cedar and filtered oxygen. It was a fortress in the sky, silent and impenetrable. However, the silence was an illusion. Ivy's trained eyes immediately spotted the security detail. A large man in a dark suit stood by the service entrance. Another was positioned near the hallway leading to the bedrooms. They were statues, blending into the shadows, but their presence made the hair on her arms stand up. She was not a guest here. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. "Make yourself at home," Nico said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. He walked past her, tossing his trench coat onto a leather ottoman without looking back. Ivy didn't move. She felt overwhelmed, not just by the luxury, but by the sheer weight of stepping back into his world. For the last year, she had lived in a studio apartment the size of this foyer. She had counted pennies for groceries. Now, she was standing in a room where a single vase probably cost more than her car. She drifted toward the massive windows. The view of Harborview was spectacular. The storm had turned the city into a grid of blurred lights, a glowing nervous system stretching out to the black void of the ocean. "My God," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. From the balcony, Nico watched her. He had kept his mask of indifference firmly in place since they left the restaurant, but as he saw her face reflected in the glass, a crack appeared in his armor. She looked exactly as she had the first night he brought her here. 3 years ago, back then, she had pressed her hand against the glass, eyes wide with wonder, telling him that the city looked like spilled jewelry. He remembered the way she had smiled at him that night, a smile that had made him feel, for the first time in his life, that he wasn't just a weapon for his family. He pushed the memory down, hardening his jaw. That woman had been a fiction. "Come away from the window," Nico commanded, though his tone lacked its usual bite. "You are a target, remember?" Ivy stepped back, turning to face him. Her wonder vanished, replaced by the guarded expression of the bartender. "Maya, where do I sleep?" she asked. "The guest suite is down the hall. Second door on the left," Nico said. "Get settled, then come back out." "We have work to do." 20 minutes later, they sat opposite each other in the living room. Nico had poured himself a bourbon, but he hadn't offered her one. A notebook lay on the coffee table between them. "We need a story," Nico said, skipping the pleasantries. "The wedding is in 4 days. If anyone asks, we've been seeing each other for 3 months. We reconnected quietly after I reached out to you." 3 months, Ivy asked, crossing her arms. "That implies we are serious." "We are serious," Nico corrected. "If I am bringing you to Marco's wedding, it means I am considering marrying you. That is the only reason I would expose you to the family again." Ivy felt a phantom ache in her chest. There was a time when she had dreamed of hearing him say those words for real. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "Well, how did we reconnect?" "I ran into you." Nico suggested. At a coffee shop. Ivy let out a short, dry laugh. You? In a coffee shop? Nico, please. You have never stepped foot in a Starbucks in your life. You used to tell me that diner coffee tasted like burnt dirt and despair. Nico paused, his glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, surprised that she remembered such a small detail. I did say that, didn't I? He murmured. You did, Ivy said, a faint smile touching her lips despite the tension. You are a coffee snob. If we met, it would have to be somewhere else. Maybe a bookstore? You like rare history books? Nico lowered his glass. You remember the first edition on Roman history I bought in Chicago? I remember you spent $4,000 on it and then refused to let anyone touch it without gloves. Ivy countered. The air between them shifted. For a moment, they weren't enemies plotting a deception. They were two people who knew each other's quirks and shadows better than anyone else. A bookstore, then, Nico agreed, his eyes locking onto hers. I saw you in the biography section. I asked you if you were still reading about tragedies, and I told you I was trying to write a comedy. Ivy finished, the line slipping out automatically. It was an inside joke they used to share, that their lives were too tragic to be anything but a bad novel. Nico stared at her, the silence stretching thin and taut. He reached up and loosened his tie, pulling the knot away from his collar with a sharp tug. It was a subconscious habit, something he only did when he was finally relaxing or when he thought he was alone. Ivy watched the movement, her breath catching in her throat. It was such a familiar gesture. It brought back a flood of memories. Late nights in this very room, him coming home exhausted from family business, loosening his tie as he walked through the door to find her waiting. We should stick to the bookstore story, Nico said abruptly. Breaking the spell, it is plausible. Right, Ivy said, looking away. Bookstore, 3 months. Dinner was a surreal affair. Nico's housekeeper, a stout woman named Elena, who had been with the family for decades, served a meal of roasted chicken and risotto. Elena moved around the table with efficient silence, but her eyes kept darting toward Ivy. It was clear she recognized the woman sitting at the table. She had been there when the FBI raided the place. She knew Ivy was the reason the old Don was in a cell. Thank you, Elena, Nico said as she placed a dish of asparagus down. Elena nodded. Anything else? Boss? No, that'll be all, Nico said. Then he paused. Actually, Elena, please pour some wine for Miss Cole. Elena froze. The bottle hovered over Ivy's glass. She looked at Nico, confused. She had expected him to treat this woman like a prisoner, or worse. To hear him use a title of respect was jarring. Miss Cole? Elena repeated, testing the words. Yes, Nico said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register that made people freeze. You will address her as Miss Cole. She is my guest. And she is with me. Is that understood? Elena paled. Understood, boss. Of course. Miss Cole. She poured the wine with a shaking hand and retreated into the kitchen. Ivy watched the kitchen door swing shut, then looked at Nico. He was cutting his chicken with surgical precision, ignoring her gaze. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. She knows who I am. She probably hates me. She can hate you on her own time, Nico said without looking up. In this house, she respects you. If the staff smells disrespect, it spreads. By tomorrow, the bodyguards will know. By Wednesday, the drivers. I need everyone to believe you belong here. Is that the only reason, Ivy asked? To sell the lie? Nico stopped cutting. He looked up, meeting her gaze across the candle-lit table. His eyes were dark pools, unreadable and deep. Eat your dinner. Eva, he said softly. Ivy felt a tremor go through her. He used her undercover name when he wanted to distance himself. But tonight, it sounded less like a weapon and more like a shield. She picked up her fork, but her appetite was gone. In its place was a confusing warmth that she had no business feeling. That night, the storm broke over the city in earnest. Thunder shook the foundations of the penthouse, vibrating through the steel beams. Ivy slept fitfully in the guest room. The silk sheets felt too smooth, the mattress too soft after a year on a lumpy futon. When she finally drifted off, the nightmare was waiting for her. She was back in the warehouse. The air was thick with smoke and shouting. She was holding her gun, her badge heavy around her neck. Sirens wailed, red and blue lights slashing through the darkness. She saw Nico's father on his knees, hands behind his head. She saw Nico standing by the door, staring at her. But in the dream, he wasn't looking at her with betrayal. He was looking at her with dead eyes, a bullet hole in the center of his chest. "No!" Ivy gasped. Jerking awake, she sat up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her skin was cold and clammy with sweat. The room was pitch black, lit only by the flashes of lightning outside. She couldn't stay in bed. She needed water. She needed to ground herself. Ivy stumbled out of the room, barefoot, wearing only the oversized t-shirt she had packed. The penthouse was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain. She navigated the hallway by memory, her feet sinking into the plush carpet. The kitchen was dim, illuminated by the under-cabinet lighting that cast a soft, amber glow on the granite countertops. Ivy gripped the edge of the sink, breathing deeply, trying to slow her racing heart. Trouble sleeping? Ivy spun around, a gasp escaping her lips. Nico was standing in the doorway of the pantry. He was dressed in dark lounge pants and a white t-shirt, looking far more human than he did in his suits. His hair was slightly messy, as if he had been running his fingers through it. "You scared me," Ivy breathed, leaning back against the counter for support. Nico didn't apologize. He walked over to the fridge, took out a pitcher of water, and poured a glass. He slid it across the island toward her. "Drink," he said. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Maybe I did," Ivy murmured, picking up the glass. Her hands were trembling. Nico noticed. He watched the way the water rippled in the glass as she brought it to her lips. He didn't mock her. He didn't use it as leverage. He simply leaned his hip against the island, crossing his arms over his chest. "Was it the raid?" he asked. Ivy lowered the glass. She looked at him, surprised by the directness of the question. "Yes," she admitted, her voice hollow. "It is always the raid, or the aftermath." Nico studied her face in the dim light. The shadows under her eyes were dark. She looked fragile, stripped of her armor. "You won," he said quietly. "You got the conviction. You got the commendation. Why does it haunt you?" "Because I didn't want it to end that way," Ivy said, the truth spilling out before she could check it. "I never wanted violence. Nico, I wanted a clean arrest. I wanted to stop the trafficking, not destroy a family. You destroyed my family," Nico reminded her, but there was no venom in his voice. "Just a statement of fact. I know," Ivy whispered, looking down at her bare feet, "and I carry that every day. But it is not just that. It is the collateral damage, the fear in your mother's eyes, the way your brother looked at me. And, Nico prompted, "and the way you looked at me." She finished, her voice breaking. "Like I had killed you." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the sharp angles of Nico's face. The thunder followed a second later, a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. Nico moved then. He walked around the island until he was standing in front of her. He was close enough that she could smell the soap on his skin and the faint, lingering scent of his cologne. "I almost called you," he said. Ivy looked up, her eyes wide. "What?" "The night you vanished," Nico said, his voice low and rough. "After the lawyers left, after the press went away, I sat in my office with the phone in my hand. I dialed your number 3 times. "Why?" Ivy breathed. "To threaten me?" "No," Nico said. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before he tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her temple, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "I wanted to ask you why," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "Why? If you were a federal agent doing your job, why did you look like you wanted to cry when you aimed that gun at my father?" Ivy stopped breathing. He had seen it. In the chaos, in the noise, he had seen the crack in her resolve. "Because I loved you," she thought. But she couldn't say it. Not now. Not when so much blood stood between them. I don't know, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Nico didn't pull his hand away. His fingertips lingered at the side of her jaw, tracing the line of her bone structure. The touch was agonizingly gentle. It was a ghost touch, a memory of 1,000 other nights in this kitchen. "We need to make this look real," Nico said, his voice dropping lower, becoming husky. "At the wedding. People will be watching for cracks. We cannot just stand next to each other. We have to look like we cannot keep our hands off each other." Ivy's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to feel it through the air. "Like what?" "Like this," Nico whispered. His hand slid to the back of her neck, his thumb resting against her pulse point. He could feel the frantic rhythm of her blood. Ivy leaned into his touch instinctively, her body betraying her mind. She tilted her head back slightly, her eyes fluttering shut. Nico leaned in. He gave her every chance to push him away. He paused, his breath warm against her lips, waiting for a protest, but Ivy didn't push. She couldn't. The pull was too strong. It was gravity. It was fate. He closed the distance. The kiss was slow at first, tentative. It wasn't an assault. It was a question. His lips moved against hers with a softness that shattered her defenses. It tasted like bourbon and rain. It tasted like the past. Ivy made a small, helpless sound in the back of her throat. Her hands, which had been gripping the counter, uncurled and reached out. She grabbed the fabric of his t-shirt, twisting it in her fists, pulling him closer. That small movement broke the dam. Nico groaned, a low vibration in his chest, and the kiss deepened instantly. The gentleness evaporated, replaced by a desperate, starving hunger. He pressed her back against the granite counter, his body covering hers, shielding her, claiming her. His other hand came up to cup her face, holding her still as he devoured her mouth. Ivy responded with equal force, her mouth opening to him, her tongue meeting his. It was frantic. It was messy. It was 3 years of anger and longing exploding in a single moment. She felt his hand slide down her neck, over her shoulder, his thumb digging into her collarbone. The heat of his body was overwhelming, burning through the thin cotton of her shirt. For a moment, she forgot the wedding. She forgot the threats. She forgot that she was supposed to be dead. All she knew was Nico. He pressed his hips against hers, and the friction sent a shockwave of desire through her that made her knees buckle. Nico caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist, anchoring her. He trailed his lips down her jawline, finding the sensitive spot beneath her ear that he used to know so well. Ivy gasped, her head falling back. "Nico," she whispered, his name a prayer and a plea. But as his hand moved lower, skimming her side, reality crashed back in. A flash of lightning lit up the room, and in the sudden brightness, Ivy remembered where she was. She remembered who he was. She remembered the gun in her hand and the betrayal in his eyes. Panic spiked in her chest, cold and sharp. She stiffened in his arms, her breath hitched, turning into a ragged gasp of fear. Nico felt the change instantly. He froze. He pulled back, his chest heaving. His eyes were blown wide, dark with arousal, but clearing rapidly as he saw the look on her face. He stepped back, putting 2 feet of distance between them. He ran a hand over his face, dragging his fingers through his hair. The silence in the kitchen was deafening, broken only by their harsh breathing. Nico started, his voice rough. "That was practice." Ivy stared at him, her lips swollen, her heart racing. Practice. He called it practice. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling naked. "It felt real," she whispered, her voice trembling. Nico looked at her, and for a second, she saw the torture in his eyes. He wanted to reach for her again. She could see his hands clench into fists at his sides to stop himself. "Go to bed, Ivy," he said, turning his back on her. "Before I forget that this is a job." Ivy didn't wait. She turned and fled the kitchen, running down the hallway to the safety of the guest room. She locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down to the floor. She touched her lips, which still tingled with the memory of his mouth. She hated herself for wanting it, and she hated him for making her want it. Nico remained in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter where she had just been, gripping the edge until his knuckles turned white. He stared at the dark window, listening to the rain. He was a fool. He had brought the enemy into his house, and now he realized the danger wasn't that she would betray him again. The danger was that he would let her. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, washing the city in a deceptively cheerful light. The drive to the Caruso family estate in the suburbs was silent. Nico drove his black sedan himself, dismissing the driver. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, wearing a cream-colored dress that Silas had sent over. It was elegant, modest, and expensive, armor for the battlefield of a family brunch. They pulled into the long driveway, lined with cypress trees. The estate was a sprawling Mediterranean villa that screamed old money and buried secrets. Cars lined the front, Mercedes, Bentleys, Ferraris. Ready? Nico asked as he killed the engine. No, Ivy said honestly. Nico reached across the console. He didn't take her hand. Instead, he rested his hand on the back of her neck, his fingers warm and heavy. It was a possessive gesture, a reminder of the night before, and a warning. You are mine today, he said. Remember that? If you look frightened, they will eat you alive. If you look guilty, they will shoot you. Look at me like you love me. Ivy took a deep breath. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. She summoned every ounce of her training. I can do that, she said. They walked into the house together. The noise of the brunch hit them. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of garlic and tomatoes. It was a scene of warmth and family, but Ivy knew the rot that lay beneath the floorboards. Nico kept his hand on the small of her back as they entered the main dining room. The moment they stepped through the archway, the room went quiet. 30 faces turned toward them. Cousins, uncles, wives, and at the head of the table, Aunt Amelia. Amelia froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her sharp, bird-like eyes narrowed as she zeroed in on Ivy. She didn't look at the dress. She looked at the face. She looked at the way Ivy stood. Nico, Amelia said, her voice cutting through the silence. You are late, and you brought a guest. This is Ivy, Nico said, his voice calm and challenging. She is with me. He pulled Ivy closer, his hand firm on her waist. It wasn't just a prop. Ivy felt the heat of his palm through the silk of her dress. She leaned into him, resting her hand on his forearm. It was a survival instinct seeking shelter. But to the room, it looked like devotion. Ivy, Amelia repeated, standing up. She walked around the table, stopping 3 feet away. She studied Ivy's face with a terrifying intensity. You look familiar, my dear, Amelia said softly. Have we met? Ivy's heart hammered, but she forced a smile. She squeezed Nico's arm. I don't believe so. Signora, Ivy lied smoothly. I have a common face. Amelia hummed, unconvinced. She looked at Nico, then back at Ivy. She saw the tension. Yes. But she also saw the way Nico's thumb was subconsciously rubbing circles on Ivy's hip. She saw the way Ivy's body naturally angled toward him. Sit, Amelia commanded, pointing to the empty chairs. We will see if you survive the antipasto. As they sat down, under the scrutiny of the entire Caruso clan, Ivy realized with a sinking feeling that the hardest part wasn't going to be fooling them. The hardest part was going to be surviving the fact that every touch, every glance, and every protective gesture from Nico felt less like a lie and more like a homecoming. By Wednesday evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted from hostile territory to a strange, suspended reality. The storm outside had cleared, leaving the Harborview skyline crisp and glittering against the night. But inside, the air was heavy with unspoken words. Nico walked into the living room, loosening his tie with that familiar, weary gesture that made Ivy's stomach flip. He looked at her, standing by the fireplace in jeans and a sweater, looking far too comfortable in his home. We need to practice, Nico announced. Ivy turned, raising an eyebrow. We've gone over the backstory a dozen times. Nico, the bookstore, the coffee, my imaginary love for your non-existent dog. I think we are good. Not the story, Nico said. walking over to the sleek sound system mounted on the wall. The dance. Ivy blinked. The dance. The reception will have a first dance for the family, Nico explained, his back to her as he scrolled through a playlist. All eyes will be on the head table. Then the floor opens. If we sit it out, we look distant. If we dance and you look like you are counting steps, we look like strangers. We need to look like we have done this 1,000 times. He pressed a button. A soft, mournful jazz trumpet began to play, accompanied by the slow brush of drums. It was a song from another era, something smoky and rich. Nico turned around and held out a hand. Ivy hesitated. This felt dangerous. Talking was one thing, rehearsing a lie across a dinner table was manageable. But this required physical proximity. It required letting him lead. "Come here, Eva," he said softly. She walked toward him, the carpet silencing her footsteps. When she reached him, he didn't hesitate. He stepped into her space, placing his right hand firmly on the curve of her waist. The contact was electric. His hand was large, warm and possessive, burning through the wool of her sweater. He took her right hand in his left, lacing their fingers together. "Follow me," he murmured. They began to move. At first, it was stiff. Ivy held herself rigid, maintaining a buffer of air between their bodies. She was hyper-aware of his legs brushing against hers, the scent of his sandalwood cologne, the way his eyes tracked her face. "Relax," Nico murmured, his voice rumbling in his chest. "You are dancing with your boyfriend, not sparring with a suspect." "I haven't danced in a long time," Ivy admitted, trying to loosen her shoulders. "It shows." Nico deadpanned. Ivy looked up, indignant. "Excuse me? I have excellent rhythm." "You are leading," Nico corrected. "Stop trying to control the room. Let me have this one thing." Ivy let out a breath and forced herself to surrender to the movement. She stopped anticipating his steps and started feeling them. Nico was a surprisingly fluid dancer. He moved with an economy of motion, guiding her effortlessly through the turns. "You are actually good at this," she said, surprise coloring her tone. Nico spun her slowly, pulling her back in smoothly. "Why do you sound so shocked?" "Because you always said you don't do romantic," Ivy teased, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You told me once that weddings were just strategic mergers with better catering. I figured you would view dancing as an inefficient way to walk." Nico looked down at her. The mask he wore for the world slipped. Just for a second, the corner of his mouth quirked up, a genuine, rare amusement lighting up his dark eyes. "I contain multitudes," he said dryly. The sight of that smile hit Ivy like a physical blow. It was the smile she used to try so hard to earn 3 years ago. It softened the hard lines of his face, making him look less like a crime boss and more like the man she had fallen in love with in the dark. She found herself staring at his mouth, remembering the way it had felt on hers in the kitchen the night before. The memory was vivid, the heat, the desperation, the taste of him. She felt a flush rise in her cheeks and quickly looked down at his tie. Nico didn't pull away. Instead, he pulled her closer. The gap between their bodies vanished, chest to chest, thigh to thigh. The music seemed to slow down, wrapping around them. Nico's hand on her waist slid to the small of her back, his fingers spreading wide, drawing her in until there was no space left for air, let alone lies. Ivy could feel the steady, rhythmic thump of his heart against her own chest. It was a strong, reassuring beat. Without thinking, she rested her cheek against his shoulder, closing her eyes. For a fleeting moment, the danger, the DeLucas, the FBI, and the betrayal didn't exist. There was just this room, this music, and the man holding her up. Nico rested his chin against the top of her head. He breathed in the scent of her hair, his hand tightening slightly on her back. Then his phone buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring vibration against her hip where his pocket pressed against her. The spell shattered instantly. Nico stiffened, the warmth draining from his body as he stepped back, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out his phone, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen. His expression turned to stone. "What is it?" Ivy asked, the cold reality of their situation rushing back in. Nico didn't speak. He turned the screen toward her. It was a photo, a grainy, low-light image taken from a car across the street. It showed Ivy leaving the Rusty Anchor 3 nights ago, her head down, locking the door. The timestamp was just hours before Nico had picked her up. Below the image was a caption, "Nice date choice. See you at the wedding," and then a second line, "Ivy Cole, badge number 8940. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. She reached out to steady herself on the back of the sofa. "They know," she whispered. "They know everything. They have been watching you," Nico said, his voice deadly quiet. "They knew exactly where to find you." This wasn't a guess. Ivy looked at him, guilt flooding her chest. It was a suffocating heavy weight. She was the weak link. She was the target painted on his back. "I can't go," she said, shaking her head. "Nico, I can't go to this wedding. If I show up, I am putting a target on Marco, on Sophia, on your entire family. They are using me to get to you." "No," Nico said, putting the phone away. "Yes," Ivy insisted, her voice rising. "Look at the photo. They are taunting you. If I leave now, if I disappear again, the leverage is gone. I will go deep underground. You will be dead within the hour." Nico cut her off. He stepped closer, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was hard, grounding. "Do you think they will just let you walk away?" he demanded. "They want a show. Ivy, they want to humiliate me and then kill you. If you leave this penthouse, you are a corpse." "I don't care about me," Ivy cried. "I care about bringing a war to your brother's doorstep." "The war is already there," Nico said grimly. "It has been there for months. You are just the excuse they needed to light the fuse." He released her and walked to the intercom on the wall, pressing the button for his head of security. "Silas!" Nico barked. "Double the detail on the perimeter. No one in or out without my direct authorization. And get the armored SUV for the rehearsal dinner. Copy that, boss." The voice crackled back. Nico turned back to Ivy. "We are going to that dinner, and we are going to the wedding, but you are not leaving my sight. Not for a second." 2 days later, the sky was a bruised purple as the sun set over Harborview. It was Friday evening, the night of the rehearsal dinner. Nico and Ivy sat in the back of a black armored SUV. The partition was up, isolating them from the driver and the bodyguard in the front seat. Ivy was wearing a cocktail dress in deep emerald green, the color bringing out the hazel in her eyes, but her posture was anything but relaxed. She scanned the passing cars through the tinted, bulletproof glass, her hand resting near the door handle out of habit. Nico watched her. "You are scanning for tails," he noted. "Old habits." Ivy murmured. "We are on the main causeway. It is a choke point. If someone wanted to hit us, they would do it here or at the exit ramp." "Relax," Nico said, though he didn't look relaxed himself. "We have a lead car and a tail car. We are secure." Ivy nodded, but her stomach remained tight. She looked at Nico. He looked impeccable in a navy suit, but the tension in his jaw was visible. Traffic slowed as they approached the bridge leading to the downtown district where the restaurant was located, the cars packed together, brake lights painting the wet asphalt red. "This is bad," Ivy whispered. "We're sitting ducks." Suddenly, a sedan in the lane to their left swerved violently, cutting off the lead car. Tires screeched. "Contact left!" Ivy shouted, her voice changing instantly from date to agent. Before the driver could react, the roar of an engine split the air. A motorcycle wove through the stalled traffic, pulling up alongside the rear passenger window where Nico was sitting. 2 riders, helmets, dark visors. The passenger on the bike reached into his leather jacket. "Get down!" Ivy screamed. She didn't weigh the pros and cons. She lunged across the leather seat, throwing her entire body over Nico. She grabbed his lapels and yanked him down, shielding his head and chest with her own torso. Pop, 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 pop. Gunshots cracked through the air, loud and flat. The window beside Nico spiderwebbed instantly, the reinforced glass holding but shattering into a million opaque diamonds. The impact shuddered through the heavy door. "Go!" Ivy roared at the driver. "Ram the car! Get us out of the box!" The driver, stunned for a microsecond, snapped into action at her command. He slammed the accelerator. The heavy SUV lurched forward, smashing into the rear bumper of the sedan, blocking them. Metal crunched, glass flew, and the sedan spun out of the way. The motorcycle peeled off as the bodyguards in the tail car opened fire, their rounds sparking against the pavement. "Stay down!" Ivy ordered, pressing Nico into the leather. She kept one hand on the back of his head, her body a human shield, her eyes darting to the rear window to check for pursuit. Nico was frozen, not with fear, but with shock. He was lying across the seat, staring up at the woman who had once put his father in prison. She was covering him. She was offering herself up as a barrier between him and a bullet. He could feel her heart pounding against his ribs, a frantic, powerful rhythm. He could feel the tension in her muscles as she braced against the swaying of the car. "We are clear," the driver shouted, swerving onto the exit ramp, tires squealing, taking the secondary route to the safe house. Ivy stayed on top of him for another full minute, until they were speeding down a dark industrial road. Only then did she pull back, breathless, her hair wild. "Are you hit?" she demanded, her hands instantly checking him. She patted down his chest, his arms, his sides. "Nico, talk to me." "Are you hit?" Nico sat up slowly, brushing glass dust from his sleeve. "I am fine," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Ivy grabbed his arm. "You are bleeding!" She pointed to his left forearm. A shard of glass from the inner layer of the window had flown during the impact, slicing through his suit jacket and shirt. Blood was seeping into the navy fabric, dark and wet. "It is a scratch," Nico said, staring at her. He wasn't looking at the wound. He was looking at her face. Her eyes were fierce, dilated with adrenaline. She looked magnificent, and she looked terrifying. "Why did you do that?" he asked quietly. Ivy looked at the wound, then up at him, confused. "Do what?" "You used your body as a shield," Nico said. "You covered me." Ivy blinked, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving her hands shaking. "You are the asset," she said automatically, "the target." "I am the man who is blackmailing you," Nico corrected. "If I died back there, you would be free." Ivy went still. The car hit a bump, jostling them. "I didn't think about that," she whispered. I saw the gun." Nico looked at her for a long moment, a profound shift occurring behind his eyes. He realized then that she hadn't just been playing a role 3 years ago. The protective instinct, the care, it was real. It was part of who she was. She couldn't let him die, even if it served her interests. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in a quiet residential neighborhood. Miles away from the chaos of the bridge, the interior was sparse, cold, and secure. Ivy led Nico into the master bedroom. It was dimly lit, the blinds drawn tight. She pushed him gently to sit on the edge of the bed. "Take off your jacket," she instructed, her voice steady again. Nico obeyed, wincing slightly as he peeled the fabric away from the cut. He unbuttoned his cuff and rolled up his shirt sleeve, revealing a jagged 3-inch gash on his forearm. It was bleeding sluggishly, but it wasn't deep enough to need stitches. Ivy returned from the bathroom with a first aid kit. She knelt on the floor between his knees, opening the box. The position was submissive, but her energy was dominant, focused. "This is gonna sting," she warned, soaking a gauze pad in antiseptic. Nico watched her. He watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration. He watched her hands, which were trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. "You saved my life," he said. Ivy didn't look up. "I saved the operation. If you die, I am left with your angry bodyguards and a lot of questions." "Don't lie to me, Ava," Nico said softly. "Not right now." Ivy paused, the gauze hovering over his skin. She looked up. Her hazel eyes were wide, vulnerable. "Fine." She breathed. "I saved you." She pressed the gauze to the cut. Nico hissed through his teeth, his free hand gripping the bedsheet. Ivy worked quickly, cleaning the wound and wrapping it efficiently with a white bandage. When she was finished, she didn't move away. She stayed kneeling between his legs, her hands resting on his knees. The adrenaline crash was hitting her now. She felt weepy, exhausted, and wired all at once. Nico reached out with his uninjured hand. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt. "You are shaking," he murmured. "So are you," Ivy whispered. Nico looked down at his own hand. It was true. A fine tremor ran through his fingers. The realization of how close they had come to death stripped away the remaining layers of his composure. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs, bringing his face level with hers. His shirt was half open at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. "Put your hand here," he said. He took her hand and placed it flat against the center of his chest, right over his heart. Ivy could feel it. Thump, thump, thump. It was racing, powerful and alive. The heat of his skin burned her palm. "I trust you with this," Nico said, his voice rough with emotion. "Even after everything, even after the lies, even after the prison sentence, when the bullets started flying, I knew you wouldn't let me die." Ivy stared at him, tears pricking her eyes. The trust in his voice broke something inside her. It was the forgiveness she hadn't known she needed. "Nico," she whispered. She leaned forward. It wasn't a calculated move. It was gravity again. She kissed him. It was slow, tender, tasting of relief and salt. Nico let out a ragged sigh against her mouth, his hand coming up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. Then the dam broke. Nico gripped her waist and pulled her up. Ivy scrambled onto the bed, and he pulled her onto his lap, her legs bracketing his hips. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her hands in his thick, dark hair, pulling him closer. The kiss turned desperate. It was a collision of two people who had spent 3 years trying to forget how much they wanted each other. Nico's mouth was hot and demanding, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her. Ivy met him stroke for stroke, a small moan vibrating in her throat. Nico's hands roamed over her back, sliding up the silk of her dress, his fingers splaying between her shoulder blades, pressing her chest against his. He wanted to merge with her, to erase the space between them, to prove that they were both still alive. Ivy felt a fire ignite in her belly. This wasn't practice. This wasn't a performance for a wedding. This was Nico. This was the man she loved, the man she had betrayed, the man who made her feel safe even when the world was burning. She ground her hips against him, and Nico growled, his hand sliding down to grip her thigh, his thumb digging into the soft flesh. He kissed her jaw, her neck, biting lightly at the sensitive cord of muscle there. "Eva," he murmured against her skin, his breath hot. "My Eva." Ivy froze. Then, a second later, he whispered, "Ivy." The two names, spoken in the same breath, hung in the air like smoke. Eva was the lie, Ivy was the truth, and he wanted both, or neither. Ivy pulled back, gasping for air. Her chest heaved. She looked at him, her eyes wide and panicked. The reality of their situation crashed down on her. She was sleeping with the mark. She was falling for the target. Again. And he was falling for the traitor. Nico looked at her, his eyes black with desire, his lips swollen and red. He saw the conflict in her face. He saw the wall go back up. He didn't try to pull her back. He slowly loosened his grip on her waist, opening his hands. Ivy scrambled off his lap, backing away until she hit the dresser. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling violently. "We can't," she whispered. "Nico, we can't do this." Nico stayed on the edge of the bed, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the sweat. "We just did," he said hoarsely. "We can't do it again," Ivy said, her voice shaking. "It complicates everything. If I let myself feel this, if you let yourself feel this, we will get killed. We will lose focus." Nico looked at her, his gaze intense and unyielding. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe it is the only thing that will keep us alive." He stood up, buttoning his ruined shirt over the bandage. "Get some rest." "Ivy," he said, his voice returning to a semblance of control, though his eyes still burned. "We have a wedding to get to in the morning, and now we know for sure it is going to be a war zone." He walked out of the room, leaving Ivy standing in the dark, her lips still burning from his kiss, her heart breaking all over again. The safe house was silent. Save for the hum of a high-end laptop and the rhythmic tapping of keys, the adrenaline from the ambush had faded. leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. Nico sat at the small kitchen table, his injured arm resting in a sling, his good hand scrolling through encrypted communication logs. Ivy paced the small room, her mind working through the puzzle like the agent she used to be. They were hunting a ghost. Someone knew their route. Someone knew Ivy's real identity. Someone wanted them dead before they reached the altar. "It has to be someone inside," Ivy said, stopping her pacing to look at Nico. The ambush was too precise. They knew exactly which car we were in. They knew the timing of the traffic lights. Nico didn't look up from the screen. "My team is loyal. I vetted every man in that convoy personally. Loyalty has a price." "Nico," Ivy countered, "or maybe it is not about money. Maybe it is about ideology or leverage." She hesitated, then took a breath. "When I was undercover, I wasn't the only one feeding information to the Bureau," she admitted. Nico stopped typing. He looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing. "What does that mean?" "It means I wasn't the only asset," Ivy said. "I suspected it toward the end. There were leaks that didn't come from me. Intel about shipments I never saw. If there was another informant 3 years ago, they could still be embedded now. Or worse, a double agent working for a rival family who played both the feds and you." Nico sat back, the leather chair creaking. He studied her face, looking for the deception he had come to expect, but finding only grim determination. "You think we were both played," he said flatly. "I think the raid didn't go down the way either of us wanted," Ivy said, "and I think that is the key." The air in the room grew heavy. This was the conversation they had been avoiding, the open wound. Nico stood up, walking over to the window where the blinds were drawn tight. He peered through a crack at the empty street below. "You wanted the raid." "Eva," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You spent months building the case." "Do not pretend you were a bystander. I built a RICO case," Ivy snapped, the frustration bubbling over. "I was building a case for financial fraud and racketeering. The plan was a quiet arrest, a dawn pickup. No guns, no SWAT teams. Then why did 50 agents kick down my front door?" Nico demanded, turning to face her. "Why were there flashbangs in the hallway where my mother was sleeping?" "Because of the boy," Ivy shouted back. The room went dead silent. Nico went very still. "What boy?" Ivy stared at him, her chest heaving. "Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't know. The teenager, Mateo. The witness who was going to testify about the waterfront unions." She took a step toward him, her hands balling into fists. "We found his body 2 days before the raid. Nico, in a dumpster behind one of your warehouses. He was 16. Nico's face was a mask of stone, but his eyes flickered with something like shock. "And then my handler showed me the order," Ivy continued, her voice trembling with the memory of that day's horror. "A hit order, signed by you." Nico stared at her. For a long moment, the only sound was the refrigerator compressor humming in the corner. "You thought I ordered the death of a child," he said softly. "I saw the signature," Ivy said. "I saw the transfer of funds. That changed everything. Nico, once there was a body, the Bureau wouldn't wait. They authorized the raid immediately. They told me you were cleaning house and that if we didn't move, more witnesses would die." Nico laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that lacked any humor. "You believed it," he said, shaking his head. "You slept in my bed for 8 months. You knew my code. You knew that I forbid any violence against civilians, especially children. And yet, the moment someone waved a piece of paper in front of you, you believed I was a monster." "The evidence was there," Ivy insisted. "It was forged," Nico roared. The sudden volume made Ivy flinch, but she stood her ground. "I never ordered that hit," Nico said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I didn't even know the boy was dead until the news broke after the raid. I thought he had run away." He walked toward her, closing the distance, his presence overwhelming in the small room. "I have been investigating that murder for 3 years," he revealed, secretly, "because I knew that body was the spark that burned my family to the ground. Someone killed that boy and planted him on my property to force the FBI's hand, to trigger the raid, to take out my father and weaken me." Ivy stared at him, her mind racing. If what he said was true, then everything she had based her actions on, the moral certainty that had allowed her to betray him, was a lie. But the signature, she whispered, it was perfect. It is not hard to forge a signature when you have access to the files, Nico said. He stopped inches from her. You didn't trust me, he said, his voice laced with hurt that had been festering for years. You were supposed to be the one person who knew me, but you looked at that file and you saw a killer. You didn't ask. You just pulled the trigger. You are a crime boss. Nico, Ivy cried, tears stinging her eyes. You are not a saint. Violence is your currency. How was I supposed to know where you drew the line? I was an agent. My job was to doubt you. Your job was to lie to me. Nico shot back. You hid behind a badge and judged me while you pretended to love me. I wasn't pretending, Ivy screamed. The words hung in the air, vibrating between them. Nico froze. Ivy stood there, chest heaving, tears spilling over her lashes. I wasn't pretending, she repeated, her voice breaking. I loved you. That is why it hurts so much. That is why I almost threw up when they put the handcuffs on you. I thought you had turned into something evil, and it broke my heart. Nico stared at her. The anger in his eyes warred with something else, a desperate, aching hope. It was real? He asked hoarsely. Yes, Ivy whispered. It was real. The admission snapped the last thread of restraint holding Nico back. He stepped forward, his good hand coming up to cup her face, his fingers threading into her hair. He didn't ask this time. He didn't hesitate. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of 3 years of grief, rage, and undeniable love. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and desperation. Ivy made a small, wrecked sound in her throat and surged against him, gripping the lapels of his suit jacket. Nico walked her backward until her back hit the wall. He pressed his body against hers, pinning her there, needing to feel every inch of her. The contact was overwhelming. It was heavy and grounding. Ivy's hands moved up to his shoulders, then to his neck, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. She kissed him back with equal force, her mouth opening to his, pouring all her regret and longing into the moment. For a minute, there was no air, no thought, only the friction of their bodies and the heat of their mouths. It was the kind of passion that burned cities down. It was terrifying and inevitable. Nico pulled back, just an inch, resting his forehead against hers. His breathing was ragged. His eyes were closed, his lashes dark against his cheek. We were played, he whispered, his voice rough. Both of us. Ivy nodded, her breath hitching. Someone used us to destroy each other. Nico opened his eyes. The darkness in them was terrifying, but it wasn't directed at her anymore. It was directed at the world. We are going to find them, he vowed, and I am going to make them regret the day they learned our names. They stood there for a moment longer, holding each other, steadying themselves in the eye of the hurricane. Then, slowly, they stepped apart. They smoothed their clothes. They wiped their faces. They put the armor back on. We have a wedding to attend, Nico said, his voice returning to its usual steel. And we need to know who is waiting for us at the altar. They returned to the penthouse under the cover of darkness, moving with a new, synchronized efficiency. The tension between them was no longer hostile. It was the hum of a partnership restored. Working together, they cross-referenced the data Nico's team had gathered with the names Ivy remembered from the Bureau's old files on the Harborview families. They looked for connections, financial transfers, phone records. It took 4 hours. At 2 a.m, Ivy found it. Here, she said, pointing to a string of encrypted messages on the screen. Look at the routing number on this payment to the motorcycle gang that hit us. It bounces through a shell company in the Caymans, but the initial deposit came from a holding firm in New Jersey. Nico leaned over her shoulder, his scent enveloping her. I know that firm. It handles logistics for imports, olive oil, Ivy red, and wine. Nico straightened up, his face hardening. It is a DeLuca front. The realization settled over the room like a shroud. The DeLucas, Nico said, his voice dripping with ice. Sophia's family. They are not just marrying into your family, Ivy realized. horror dawning on her. They are executing a takeover. It makes sense, Nico said, pacing the room. My father is gone. The commission is weak. If they take me out, Marco is left in charge. Marco is soft. He is in love with Sofia. He will do whatever her father tells him. The DeLucas absorb the Caruso territory without a war. They just walk in the front door and take the keys. And the wedding is the trap, Ivy said. It is perfect. All your capos in one room. Security focused on the perimeter, not the guests. If they hit you there, it is a massacre. Nico finished. A red wedding. We have to cancel, Ivy said immediately. Call Marco. Tell him the wedding is off. Tell him Sofia's father is a traitor. Nico stopped pacing. He shook his head. I cannot. Why? Ivy demanded. Nico, they're going to kill you. If I cancel the wedding now, without public proof, I look like a paranoid tyrant destroying his brother's happiness. Nico explained. Marco won't believe me. He loves her. He'll turn against me. The families will see it as weakness and instability. The DeLucas will attack anyway. Claiming I insulted them, it starts a street war that kills hundreds. So we just walk into the slaughterhouse? Ivy asked, incredulous. No, Nico said. We walk in, and we flip the table. He turned to the window. Looking out at the city, he ruled. I need them to make the first move, he said. I need them to expose themselves in front of the other families. I need witnesses. You need bait. Ivy realized. Nico turned back to her. His eyes were soft, apologetic. I am the bait, he said. And you? Ivy looked at him. She saw the strategist, the Don, but she also saw the man who had just kissed her against a wall like he was drowning. We do it your way, she said, but we need insurance. Your men? Nico asked. My men are loyal, but they will be outside, Nico said. Inside. It will be mostly guests, and if the DeLucas bring their own shooters disguised as staff or cousins, we are outgunned. Then we need backup that isn't on the payroll, Ivy said. She walked over to her purse and pulled out a burner phone she had kept hidden in the lining. What are you doing? Nico asked, tensing. I am calling in a favor, Ivy said. She dialed a number from memory. She didn't put it on speaker, but the room was quiet enough that Nico could hear the ringback tone. Agent Miller. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. It is Cole, Ivy said. There was a long silence on the other end. You are supposed to be a ghost. Cole, Miller said. We heard you were dead. Not yet, Ivy said. Listen to me. Miller, I don't have time to explain, and I can't come in, but I have intel on a massive event happening this Saturday. The Caruso wedding? Miller asked. We are already monitoring it. You are monitoring the perimeter, Ivy said. You need eyes on the inside, and you need a TAC team on standby within 2 minutes of the venue. Why? Miller asked. Is Caruso planning something? No, Ivy said, looking Nico directly in the eyes. Caruso is the target. It is a hit. Miller, a mass casualty event. There are going to be hundreds of civilians there. Waitstaff. Children. If it goes down, it is going to be a bloodbath. Nico watched her. He stood in the doorway, his body rigid. She was talking to the enemy. She was talking to the people who had hunted his father. Every instinct he had screamed at him to snatch the phone and smash it. But he watched her face. He saw the desperation to protect. She wasn't giving him up. She wasn't negotiating a deal for herself. She was trying to save innocent lives. She was trying to save his life. I need a guarantee. Cole, Miller said, if we mobilize a SWAT team and nothing happens, I lose my badge. It will happen, Ivy said grimly. Just be ready. When the shooting starts, don't wait for a warrant, just breach. And what is your play? Miller asked. Are you undercover again? No, Ivy said softly. I am just a date. She hung up the phone and snapped it in half, dropping the pieces into the trash can. She turned to Nico. They will be there, she said. If things go south, the cavalry is 2 minutes away. Nico looked at the broken phone, then at her. You trust them? He asked. I trust Miller, Ivy said. He's a good man. He hates the mob, but he hates dead kids more. Nico nodded slowly. He walked over to her, taking her hand in his good one. He squeezed it, a silent acknowledgement of the bridge she had just built between their worlds. Then we are ready, he said. Ready for what? Ivy asked, her voice wavering slightly. "To end this," Nico said, "once and for all." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect golden day that brides prayed for. In the master bedroom of the penthouse, the mood was somber. A garment bag hung on the door. Inside was a dress that cost more than a car, a sleek, floor-length gown of midnight blue silk. It was beautiful. It was armor. Ivy stood in front of the mirror in her robe, staring at her reflection. She looked pale. Nico entered the room. He was already dressed in a black tuxedo, the crisp white shirt stark against his tan skin. His arm was still bandaged beneath the jacket, but he moved with a fluid grace that hid the injury. He stopped when he saw her. "You should get dressed," he said quietly. "The car is downstairs." Ivy turned to him. "Nico." He walked over to her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He opened it to reveal a diamond necklace, a single teardrop stone on a delicate platinum chain. "It was my mother's," he said. "She wore it on her wedding day." Ivy's breath hitched. "Nico, I can't wear that. It is too much. It means too much. It means you are under my protection." Nico said, "It means you are family." He took the necklace out and stepped behind her. Ivy lifted her hair, her hands shaking. Nico fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin, warm and rough. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to the curve of her shoulder. "Today is going to be hard," he whispered against her skin. "I know," Ivy said. "I need you to stay close to me," Nico said. "But if I tell you to run, you run. Do you understand? You don't argue. You don't try to save me. You get to the exit and you run to Miller. I am not leaving you," Ivy said fiercely, turning in his arms to face him. Nico cupped her face. His eyes were dark with an emotion that looked a lot like love and a lot like goodbye. "We survive," he said. "That is the rule." Ivy nodded. "We survive." He kissed her forehead, a benediction. "Now get dressed." "Eva," he said, using the name of the woman who could handle anything. "We have a show to put on." As Ivy reached for the blue dress, she felt the cold weight of the diamond against her throat. It felt like a promise, or a target downstairs. The engine of the limousine purred. The city was waiting. The DeLucas were waiting. And the end of the story was waiting to be written in blood or in vows. Saturday morning broke over Harborview with a blinding, relentless clarity. The storm had washed the city clean, leaving the sky a piercing blue that felt less like a blessing and more like a spotlight. Inside the penthouse, the silence was absolute. Ivy stood before the full-length mirror in the master bedroom, her hands smoothing the fabric of the gown Nico had chosen. It was midnight blue silk, fluid and heavy, draping over her frame like liquid water. It had a high neck and long sleeves, modest by modern standards, but the back was entirely open, plunging low to reveal the line of her spine. It was a dress that commanded attention not by shouting, but by whispering. She stared at her reflection, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The severe bun she wore at the bar was gone, replaced by soft waves that framed her face. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting the hazel in her eyes and the sharp curve of her cheekbones. She didn't look like Ivy Cole, the disgraced agent living in a studio apartment. She didn't look like Maya, the invisible bartender. She looked like a queen on a chessboard, waiting to be moved. The door clicked open. Nico entered. He was dressed in a black tuxedo that fit him with military precision, his white shirt crisp, his bow tie perfectly knotted. He was adjusting a cufflink on his uninjured wrist, his head down, but he stopped dead the moment he crossed the threshold. His hands fell to his sides. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them hummed with a tension that was thicker than the silk she wore. Nico's dark eyes traveled up from the hem of her dress to her face, drinking her in with a hunger he didn't try to hide. Ivy felt her breath hitch. She had spent 3 years trying to forget the way he looked at her, and now, facing the full force of it, she felt her knees weaken. "You look—" Nico started, his voice rough. He trailed off, shaking his head slightly as if words were failing him. He walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped inches away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You look dangerous," he finished, the words spoken with a stunned reverence. "Dangerous?" Ivy asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Like a weapon," Nico murmured. "Like something beautiful that could bring a kingdom down." He reached out, his fingers brushing the teardrop diamond that rested in the hollow of her throat. His mother's necklace. The cold stone against her warm skin made her shiver, but she didn't pull away. "You belong in this world." "Ava," he said softly, using the name of the ghost she used to be. "You always did. That is what scared me the most." Ivy looked up at him, her heart aching. "I don't belong here. Nico, I am just pretending. Are you?" Nico asked. He stepped closer, eliminating the last inch of space between them. His hand moved from the necklace to her waist, his thumb tracing small, possessive circles against the silk. The touch was electric, grounding her in the moment. Nico leaned down, his eyes searching hers. The hardness that usually defined his features had softened, replaced by a raw, open vulnerability that terrified her more than his anger ever could. "If today goes wrong," he whispered, "I need you to know something." "Don't," Ivy said, shaking her head. "Don't say it like it is a goodbye." "It might be," Nico said. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't like the desperate, angry kiss in the safe house. This was slow. It was deliberate. It was a savoring, a memorization of texture and taste. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that broke her heart. He held her as if she were made of glass, his hand splaying across the small of her back, pulling her gently against him. Ivy closed her eyes and let herself sink into the illusion. For this 1 minute, she wasn't a liability. She wasn't a traitor. She was just a woman standing in the arms of the man she loved. On the morning of a wedding where they would stand together, she let herself imagine a different life, one where the lies hadn't happened, where this dress was for her own rehearsal dinner, where the gun in his waistband didn't exist. The buzz of a phone shattered the world. It came from the dresser where Nico had left his device. It was a short, sharp vibration that sounded like a warning shot. Nico pulled back, his forehead resting against hers for one last second before he sighed, the mask of the dawn sliding back into place. "Ignore it," Ivy whispered, terrified of what the message might say. "I can't," Nico said. He stepped away, the loss of his warmth leaving her instantly cold. He picked up the phone. As he looked at the screen, his face went pale. The blood drained from his lips, leaving him looking like a statue. "What is it?" Ivy asked, stepping forward. Nico didn't answer. He turned the phone around so she could see. It was a photo. It was a picture of Ivy, standing in this room, wearing the blue dress. It had been taken through the window, from a high angle. Likely a neighboring building, the resolution was high enough to see the diamond at her throat. Below the photo was a text message. "Everyone deserves to know who your date really is. Ivy Cole, badge number 8940. Ivy brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "They are here," she whispered. "They have a line of sight into the penthouse." Nico moved instantly, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the window, dragging her into the hallway where the walls were thick and windowless. "Stay away from the glass," he ordered, his voice engaging command mode. He looked at the phone again, his mind racing. They were planning to expose her, but why send the threat now? Why not just do it? "Psychological warfare," Nico muttered. "They want me off balance. They want me panicked." He looked at Ivy. She was pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with fear, but he knew, looking at her, that she wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for him, and that made his decision impossible and necessary. "Listen to me," Nico said, gripping her shoulders. "The plan has changed." "What?" Ivy asked. "If I walk into that wedding holding your hand, looking like I would die for you, I am painting a target on your chest," Nico explained, his voice hard and fast. "If the DeLucas think you are my weakness, they will grab you. They will use you to make me surrender. So what do? We distance," Nico said. Ivy blinked. "I don't understand. I have to treat you like you mean nothing to me," Nico said, the words clearly tasting like ash in his mouth, in public At the ceremony, at the reception, I have to look bored. I have to look like you are just a trophy I picked up to annoy my family. If I push you away, if I act cold, maybe they will think you are not worth leverage. Maybe they will focus the crosshairs on me and leave you alone." Ivy stared at him. He was asking her to play the role of the discarded mistress, to let him publicly humiliate her in order to save her life. It stung. It stung more than she expected. After the intimacy of the morning, after the trust they had rebuilt, being pushed away felt like a physical rejection. But she looked at his eyes. They were desperate, pleading with her to understand. "Okay," she whispered. "You understand?" Nico asked intently. "If I ignore you, if I walk away from you, it is not real. It is the only shield I have left to give you." "I understand," Ivy said, straightening her spine. "I can play the part." Nico looked at her for one last second, looking like he wanted to ruin the plan and pull her back into his arms. But he didn't. He nodded once, sharp and professional. "Let's go," he said. "The car is waiting." The Cathedral of St. Jude was a cavernous, Gothic masterpiece of stone and stained glass. It smelled of frankincense and old money. The pews were packed, 500 guests, the elite of the city, the corrupt politicians, the union leaders, and the two crime families, the Carusos on the left, the DeLucas on the right. Ivy sat in the third row on the Caruso side. She was surrounded by distant cousins and business associates who eyed her with curiosity but kept their distance. Nico was at the altar. He stood beside his brother, Marco. Marco looked young, nervous, and happy, fidgeting with his cuffs. Nico stood like a sentinel. He was still, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't look at Ivy, not once. When she had walked in, he had turned his back to speak to the priest. When she took her seat, he had been busy adjusting Marco's tie to the observer. She was irrelevant. A +1 who had been seated with the B-list relatives. Ivy sat with her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of polite disinterest, but inside, her stomach was twisting. She scanned the balcony. She scanned the choir loft. She looked for the glint of a scope or the bulge of a jacket. The organ music swelled. The doors opened. Sophia DeLuca walked down the aisle. She was beautiful, radiant in white lace, oblivious to the fact that her wedding was a potential slaughterhouse. Her father, Don DeLuca, walked her down. Don DeLuca was a heavy-set man with a face like a bulldog and eyes like shark glass. As he passed Ivy's row, his head turned. He looked right at her. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a slow, predatory stare. A smile curled his lip, a smile that said, "I know." Ivy felt a chill race down her spine. He knew who she was. The text message had come from his camp. He was savoring the moment before the trap sprung. The ceremony proceeded. Vows were exchanged. Rings were slipped onto fingers. It was a beautiful, holy moment, undercut by the fact that half the men in the room were armed. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, the church erupted in applause. Marco kissed Sophia. Nico clapped, a polite, distant expression on his face. As the procession turned to walk back up the aisle, Nico finally looked at Ivy. It was a split-second glance. His eyes met hers over the heads of the crowd. In that brief contact, she saw the apology. She saw the promise. Stay ready. The reception was held at the Grand Harbor Hotel, in a ballroom that dripped with crystal chandeliers and gold leaf. The atmosphere was loud, boisterous, and tense. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. A live band played Sinatra standards. Ivy stood near a pillar, holding a glass of champagne she hadn't touched. She had been formally introduced as Nico's date at the entrance, and the ripples of shock were still spreading through the room. "Is that her?" a woman whispered loudly near the buffet. "The one from 3 years ago? It looks like her." Another voice hissed. "Ava, the one who testified. Why would Nico bring a rat here? Maybe he kept her as a pet, to show he broke her." The whispers were vicious, designed to carry. Ivy kept her chin high, ignoring them. She was working. Her eyes scanned the room, dissecting the security. Nico was on the other side of the ballroom, surrounded by his capos. He was holding court, laughing at something his aunt said, looking completely at ease. He was ignoring Ivy perfectly, but Ivy noticed he was moving. He was slowly circling the room, working his way toward the DeLuca tables. He was talking, smiling, shaking hands, but his eyes were hard. He was testing the waters. Ivy turned her attention to the perimeter. There were men standing by the kitchen doors. They weren't hotel security. They weren't Caruso men. They wore ill-fitting suits, and they weren't drinking. She saw one of them adjust his jacket. Her trained eye caught the flash of a shoulder holster. Another man was positioned on the mezzanine level, looking down. He had an earpiece, but he wasn't speaking into it. He was listening. Ivy's heart began to hammer. There were too many of them, at least 20. They were positioning for a crossfire. She looked for Nico, and he was talking to Don DeLuca near the head table. The two men were smiling, but the air around them was toxic. Nico, she thought, urging him to look at her, as if he heard her. Nico disengaged from DeLuca. The band shifted tempo, sliding into a slow, melancholic ballad. Nico walked across the dance floor. The crowd parted for him. He walked straight to Ivy. His face was unreadable. He didn't smile. He stopped in front of her and extended a hand. "Dance," he said. It wasn't a request. Ivy placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, almost bruising. He pulled her out onto the floor. The moment they were in the center of the room, under the dim lights, he pulled her close, too close for polite company. He wrapped one arm around her waist, clamping her to him. "Don't look at them," Nico murmured against her ear, his voice barely audible over the music. "Keep your eyes on me. They are everywhere," Ivy whispered back, her hand gripping his shoulder. "By the kitchen. The mezzanine. The north exit. Nico. There are at least 20 shooters." "I know." Nico said. "I counted 22. We need to signal Miller," Ivy said. "We need to trigger the raid now before they start shooting." "Not yet," Nico said. "We need them to draw first. If Miller busts in now, DeLuca claims they are private security and lawyers get them out by morning. We need a weapon in a hand. We're going to die waiting for a weapon," Ivy hissed. Nico spun her, dipping her slightly. For a moment, her head fell back, and she looked up at the ceiling. "If it starts," Nico said, his lips brushing her temple, "do not look for me. You run to the service corridor behind the stage. Silas has a team there with an armored car. I'm not leaving you," Ivy repeated. "You are," Nico said, his voice hard, "because if you stay, I will be distracted trying to shield you. If you want me to survive, you get clear." Ivy looked into his eyes. He was telling the truth. She was his weakness. "Okay," she breathed. Nico's expression softened. He squeezed her hand. "I love you, Ivy," he whispered. It was the first time he had said it. No Eva, no past tense. Ivy's heart stopped. "Nico?" Before she could respond, the music died. It didn't fade out. It cut with a screech of feedback that made the guests wince and cover their ears. The room went silent. A static hiss echoed from the massive speakers suspended from the ceiling. Then, a voice boomed out. It wasn't the DJ. It wasn't the wedding planner. It was a recording. "Target is Nico Caruso. Confirming visual. The package is the father. We move on the signal." The blood froze in Ivy's veins. It was her voice. It was a recording from 3 years ago, a wiretap from the night of the raid. The recording continued, loud and distorted, filling every corner of the ballroom. "Do not engage the son unless he resists. But the father goes down. That is the priority. This is Special Agent Ivy Cole, badge number 8940, authorizing the strike." The recording clicked off. Silence. A terrifying, suffocating silence that lasted for exactly 2 seconds. Every head in the room whipped toward the dance floor. Hundreds of eyes locked onto Ivy. The DeLucas were smiling. The Carusos looked confused, then horrified, then furious. Don DeLuca stood up at the head table. He picked up a microphone. "A toast," he said, his voice booming, "to the groom's brother, who brought a federal agent to our family table. A rat. A traitor." He pointed a finger at Ivy. "Everyone deserves to know who she really is," DeLuca roared, "and everyone deserves to see what happens to rats." The sound of gunslides racking back echoed around the room like a chorus of crickets. Nico didn't hesitate. He didn't push her away. He didn't act cold. He spun Ivy around, putting his body between her and the DeLuca table. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a handgun. "Get down!" Nico shouted. And then the world exploded. The Mafia boss needed a date for his brother's wedding. Who he brought shocked everyone. Part 6. For one singular, suffocating second, the ballroom of the Grand Harbor Hotel was completely silent. The echo of the recording, Ivy's voice authorizing a raid on the Caruso family, hung in the air like smoke. Hundreds of eyes were wide, fixed on the woman in the midnight blue dress who stood exposed in the center of the dance floor. Then, a champagne glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound broke the trance. Chaos erupted instantly. A warning shot cracked into the crystal chandelier above, sending shards of glass raining down like diamonds. Screams tore through the air as guests scrambled, overturning chairs and diving beneath tables. The elegant reception dissolved into a stampede of terrified civilians. Don DeLuca's men didn't scramble. They moved with coordinated lethality, stepping over cowering guests, their weapons drawn and raised. They weren't looking to arrest anyone. They were moving to execute. "Get down!" Nico roared again, grabbing the edge of a heavy banquet table near them. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, he flipped the table onto its side, sending plates of food and silver candelabras crashing to the floor. The thick mahogany top provided a temporary barricade against the incoming fire. He grabbed Ivy by the waist and hauled her behind it, just as wood splintered under a hail of bullets. "Stay low," Nico ordered, pressing a hand to the back of her head to keep her down. He turned to his head of security, Silas, who was crouched nearby, returning fire with a handgun. "Silas, get the civilians out," Nico barked over the deafening noise. "The kitchen exit. Get Marco and the women out of here. But boss, we need to cover you." Silas shouted back, firing 2 shots toward the mezzanine. "Move!" Nico commanded, his eyes blazing. "If innocent people die here, we lose everything." Silas nodded grimly and signaled his team to start funneling the screaming guests toward the service doors. Ivy was pressed against the cold floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. The smell of gunpowder and expensive perfume choked the air. She wasn't trembling anymore. The fear had burned away, replaced by the cold, sharp focus of an agent under fire. She reached for the hem of her silk dress and tore a strip off, wrapping it around her hand to protect her grip. She peeked around the edge of the table. Her eyes scanned the room, analyzing the tactical layout. The DeLuca men were pushing forward on the ground floor, using the pillars for cover. But the real threat was above. "Nico!" Ivy shouted, grabbing his wrist. "The balcony, 3 o'clock!" Nico followed her gaze. High above the dance floor, on a maintenance catwalk disguised by bunting, 2 shooters were positioning themselves. They had the high ground. They had a clear line of sight behind the overturned tables. "They are flanking us," Nico realized, cursing under his breath. "We have to move," Ivy said urgently. "If we stay here, we are fish in a barrel. The pillars on the east wall, they are marble. They will hold." "On my count," Nico said, gripping his weapon tight. 1, 2, 3. They broke cover, sprinting low toward the massive stone columns lining the east wall. Bullets chipped the floor at their heels. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of screams and gunfire. As they neared the safety of the pillars, Ivy saw it. A shooter emerged from behind a curtain near the stage. He wasn't aiming at the crowd. He wasn't aiming at the guards. He leveled his weapon directly at Nico's chest. Nico didn't see him. He was focused on the men on the balcony, firing suppressive shots to keep their heads down. Time slowed to a crawl. Ivy saw the shooter's finger tighten on the trigger. She calculated the angle. There was no time to shout. No time to pull out a weapon she didn't have. There was only physics. "No!" Ivy screamed. She threw her body weight against Nico, shoving him hard to the right. The force of the impact sent him stumbling off balance. Just as the gun cracked, the bullet missed Nico's heart by inches. But it found Ivy. A line of fire seared across her upper arm, tearing through the silk of her sleeve and slicing into the skin. The impact spun her around, and she collided with the stone pillar. Gasping as pain radiated down her shoulder. Ava! Nico roared, the sound raw and terrified. He caught her before she slid to the floor, dragging her behind the safety of the marble column. He pressed her back against the cold stone, his eyes wide, scanning her frantically. "You are hit!" he choked out, seeing the blood beginning to stain the blue silk dark purple. "It is a graze," Ivy gasped, clutching her arm. "It burns, but I can move the fingers." It missed the bone. Nico looked at the blood, and his face changed. The calculated composure of the dawn vanished. In its place was a pure, unadulterated fury that terrified her. "They hurt you," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Focus, Nico," Ivy snapped, grabbing his lapels with her good hand. "We are not dead yet." She reached into the hidden pocket of her dress, a small, reinforced pouch sewn into the lining, and pulled out a tiny, high-frequency earpiece. She shoved it into her ear and tapped the side. "Miller," she shouted into the mic. "Code blue. Repeat, code blue at the Grand Harbor. Officers down, active shooters, execute the breach." There was a crackle of static, and then Miller's voice came through. Loud and clear. "We hear the shots. Cole, we are coming in. Breach teams are at the doors. 60 seconds. "They are coming," Ivy told Nico, her face pale but determined. 60 seconds. We just have to survive for 1 minute. Nico nodded, wrapping his arm around her waist to support her. "We survive," he repeated. "Their promise." Suddenly, the firing stopped. It didn't taper off. It ceased abruptly on a command. "Hold fire!" A voice boomed from the center of the room. Nico and Ivy peered around the pillar. Don DeLuca stood in the center of the wrecked dance floor. He was surrounded by 5 of his remaining men, but he wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding Sophia. Marco's new bride was sobbing, her white wedding dress smeared with soot. DeLuca had her in a chokehold, using her body as a human shield. A gun was pressed to her temple. Marco was on his knees 10 feet away, held down by 2 DeLuca guards, screaming for his wife. "Come out, Caruso!" DeLuca shouted, his face red with exertion. "Come out or the bride dies on her wedding day." The room trembled with tension. The sirens outside were getting louder, a wailing chorus approaching from all sides. DeLuca heard them too. He knew his time was running out. He needed a hostage to negotiate his exit. "I want Nico Caruso and the rat," DeLuca yelled. "Trade them for the girl." Ivy looked at Nico. His jaw was set so hard she thought his teeth might shatter. "He's desperate," Ivy whispered. "He knows he lost." Nico looked at Marco, who was weeping on the floor. He looked at Sophia, terrified and innocent. Then he looked at Ivy, bleeding in her ruined gown. "I have to go out there," Nico said quietly. "No," Ivy said, grabbing his arm. "He will kill you the second you are in the open. He will kill Sophia if I don't," Nico said. He turned to her. He took her face in his hands, ignoring the chaos around them. "Trust me," he said. He kissed her forehead quickly, then stepped out from behind the pillar. "I am here," Nico shouted, raising his hands slowly. He walked into the open space of the dance floor. His tuxedo was torn, his arm bleeding, but he walked with the arrogance of a king. "Let the girl go." "DeLuca," Nico said calmly. "You want me?" "Here I am." DeLuca laughed, a manic sound. "The great Nico Caruso, defending the family he couldn't protect. And where is your pet? Where is the Fed?" "She is gone." Nico lied smoothly. "She ran when the shooting started. You know how rats are." DeLuca sneered. "You are lying, but it doesn't matter. I will kill you and then I will find her." While Nico spoke, Ivy didn't stay behind the pillar. She ignored the throbbing pain in her arm and moved. Keeping low, she slipped through the shadows along the wall, circling behind the bandstand. She moved silently, her eyes fixed on DeLuca's position. She needed an angle. Nico saw her movement out of the corner of his eye. He needed to buy her time. He needed to keep DeLuca focused on him. "You are a fool, DeLuca," Nico said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "You think killing me gives you the city? The feds are outside. You hear the sirens? That is the sound of your empire ending. I will walk out of here with this girl as my ticket," DeLuca spat. "You won't," Nico said, taking a step forward, "because everyone in this room knows the truth now. You killed the boy." DeLuca blinked. "What?" "Mateo," Nico said loudly, "the 16-year-old witness. You had him killed 3 years ago and planted the body on my land. You forged my signature on the hit order. You used a dead child to trick the FBI into destroying my father." A murmur ran through the remaining guests and even some of DeLuca's own men. Killing a made man was business. Killing a civilian child was a violation of the oldest codes. "I did what I had to do," DeLuca yelled, his grip on Sophia loosening slightly as he gestured with the gun. "I took out the competition. I played you and I played the feds." He admitted it. Ivy saw the opening. DeLuca was distracted, his ego provoked. His gun was inches away from Sophia's head, pointing slightly outward. Now. Ivy lunged from the shadows of the bandstand. She hit DeLuca from the blind side. She didn't use a weapon. She used her body and 3 years of combat training. She slammed her good shoulder into his arm, knocking the gun upward. The gun went off, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the ceiling. Sophia screamed and dropped to the floor. Scrambling away, DeLuca roared and tried to turn the gun on Ivy, but she was already moving. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it violently against the joint. A sickening crack echoed, and the gun clattered to the floor. She swept his legs, using his own weight against him, and slammed him onto the marble floor. Before his guards could react, Nico was there. He tackled DeLuca, pinning him to the ground, his forearm pressed against the man's throat. "It is over!" Nico snarled into DeLuca's face. Simultaneously, the main doors burst open with a deafening crash. FBI! "Drop your weapons! Police! Get down!" Dozens of agents in tactical gear swarmed the room, rifles raised. The red laser sights swept across the darkness, landing on the chests of the remaining DeLuca gunmen. Realizing they were outgunned and their leader was captured, the men dropped their weapons. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Ivy knelt on the floor, breathing hard, holding her bleeding arm. She looked up. Miller was standing over her, offering a hand. "You cut it close." "Cole," Miller grunted, pulling her up. Ivy winced, but smiled, just like old times. She looked across the room. Nico was being pulled off DeLuca by 2 agents. He wasn't fighting them. He stood up, adjusted his torn jacket, and looked straight at her. Across the wreckage of the wedding, across the shattered glass and the ruined plans, their eyes met. They were battered, bloody, and surrounded by law enforcement. But they were alive. The hospital room was quiet, a stark contrast to the madness of the ballroom. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of a monitor down the hall. Ivy lay in the bed, propped up by pillows. Her arm was bandaged and in a sling. She wore a generic hospital gown, her ruined blue dress packed away in an evidence bag. Nico sat in the plastic chair beside the bed. He looked exhausted. His face was bruised, his knuckles raw, and his tuxedo shirt was stained with blood. Some his, some hers. He hadn't left her side since the ambulance ride. "The agents just left," Nico said quietly. "And?" Ivy asked, her voice raspy. "They offered a deal," Nico said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Full cooperation against the DeLuca organization. Testimony on the racketeering, the murders, the union corruption. I give them everything. And in exchange, reduce charges for me," Nico said. "House arrest instead of prison, and I have to legitimize. The Caruso family ceases criminal operations. We become a logistics company. No more drugs, no more protection money. We go clean." Ivy stared at him. For a man like Nico, that was asking him to dismantle his identity. It was asking him to give up the power he had been raised to hold. "What did you tell them?" she asked, holding her breath. Nico looked at her. His eyes were soft, stripped of the hardness that had defined him for so long. "I told them where the files are," he said. Ivy let out a breath. She felt like she had been holding for 3 years. "You did?" "I am tired, Eva," Nico said softly. "I am tired of the blood. I'm tired of watching my back. I'm tired of almost losing you." He reached out and took her hand, the one not in a sling. His fingers were gentle, tracing the veins on the back of her hand. "Do you regret it?" Ivy asked, tears pricking her eyes. "Bringing me to the wedding? If you hadn't brought me, none of this would have happened. You would still be the Dawn." Nico shook his head slowly. "If I hadn't brought you, I would still be living in a lie," he said. I wouldn't know who betrayed my father. I wouldn't know who my enemies were. He stood up and sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her arm. He leaned in close, his face inches from hers. And I wouldn't know the most important thing, he whispered. What is that? Ivy breathed. I wouldn't know if you ever really loved me, Nico said. He brushed a thumb gently along her cheek, wiping away a stray tear. Now I know, he said. You took a bullet for me. Ivy, you destroyed your cover for me. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, he confessed, the words simple and heavy with truth. I loved you when you were Eva. I loved you when I hated you, and I love you now. Ivy, past the lies, past the raids, past the blood spilled. Ivy choked on a sob, happiness flooding through her chest, washing away the pain of the wound. I love you too, she whispered. I never stopped. She reached up with her good hand, threading her fingers into the hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled him down. The kiss was slow, unhurried, and full of aching relief. It wasn't desperate like the safe house or tentative like the penthouse. It was a promise. It was a seal. It tasted of antiseptic and exhaustion, but to Ivy, it tasted like a future. I want a life with you, Nico whispered against her lips. A boring life. A life where the only danger is burning the toast. No more bullets, no more hiding. I think I would like that. Ivy smiled against his mouth. Epilogue. 6 months later, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in streaks of lavender and burnt orange. The air was salty and cool. The small coastal restaurant was quiet, reserved for a private party. It wasn't a grand ballroom. There were no chandeliers, no armed guards at the doors, no tension in the air. Marco sat at a table near the window, laughing as Sophia fed him a piece of calamari. They looked happy, unburdened by the shadow of the DeLuca name, which had crumbled into dust after the trials. Nico stood on the wooden pier outside the restaurant. Looking out at the waves, he wore a simple linen shirt and trousers. No suit, no tie, no holster. He heard footsteps behind him. Light, familiar steps. He didn't turn around. He just smiled. Ivy walked up behind him. She wore a sundress that caught the breeze, her arm fully healed, leaving only a thin, silver scar as a reminder. Thinking about business, she asked, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her cheek on his back. Always, Nico said, covering her hands with his. The shipping contracts for the new Asian route are complex, but legitimate. Legitimate looks good on you, Ivy murmured. Nico turned in her arms. He looked younger than he had 6 months ago. The lines around his eyes had softened. The weight on his shoulders was gone. He pulled her close, resting his chin on the top of her head. They swayed slightly to the sound of the ocean, a rhythm far more peaceful than the jazz of the wedding reception. He kissed the side of her neck softly, feeling her relax entirely against him. You know, he said quietly, people still talk about that night. The wedding? Ivy asked. Yes, Nico said. They talk about the scandal, the shock, the fact that the boss brought the rat. They say it was the most dangerous thing I ever did. Was it? Ivy asked, looking up at him. Nico smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. No, he said. Bringing you wasn't the risk. The risk was daring to believe that we could survive it. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip. The risk was trusting that love was stronger than the legacy of blood. And was it? Ivy whispered. Nico didn't answer with words. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was a kiss deep with gratitude, passion, and peace. It was the kiss of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side holding the only thing that mattered. As the waves crashed softly below them and the sun dipped below the horizon, they held each other, two survivors who had rewritten their ending. The risk had been worth everything. Thank you so much for listening to The Mafia Boss Needed a Date for His Brother's Wedding. Who he brought shocked everyone. I hope you enjoyed this journey of betrayal, redemption, and intense romance as much as I enjoyed writing it. It's been a wild ride with Nico and Ivy. I would love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from today? Let me know in the comments below. And please, share your thoughts on the ending. Did Nico make the right choice? Was Ivy's sacrifice worth it? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel so you never miss a new episode. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep bringing you these emotional, action-packed tales. Until next time, keep reading and keep dreaming.